Today in the UK is Remembrance Sunday, and on this day traditionally we gather together to remember those who have perished in time of conflict. Over the summer holiday I was lucky enough to go to the Gallipoli peninsula, a piece of land jutting out of the southwestern part of Turkey. And it was here in 1915, during the First World War, that the British Empire tried to launch a surprise invasion of the Ottoman Empire to try and resupply their Russian allies further north. The campaign itself lasted almost a year, but was a complete disaster. Over 130,000 men on both sides died. Most famously, this campaign was known for the contribution of the Australian and New Zealand Army Corps. But I hope in this video it'll also give us a chance to remember those other soldiers that died serving on the Turkish side as well. So I hope you enjoy this episode of Mr. Keet on location.
Are you ready, Leopard? On your mark. Get set.
Our story begins in Australia and New Zealand, where by the end of 1914 over 52,000 new young recruits had volunteered themselves to give their lives for the British Empire. Many of these would soon be off to Egypt, from where the preparations were being made for an invasion of the Ottoman Empire. The aim was to open up a new supply route with Russia, Britain's ally in the east, so that Russia could be more easily supplied through the Mediterranean Sea and perhaps do more damage to Germany as a result. The organiser was none other than Winston Churchill, the man who'd later go down in history in the Second World War for leading Great Britain to victory. As the Anzac troops gathered in Egypt, the plan looked like it would be a quick and easy victory against a weak Ottoman foe. How was this attack to take place? Well, if you have a look down here, I will show you. First of all, this was planned to be a naval attack along what's an area of sea called the Dardanelles Straits. British and French ships were to work their way up the Dardanelles Straits to the capital of the Ottoman Empire, Istanbul. Once they had captured Istanbul, the seaborne route to Russia was secured. However, the Turks had prepared for this and they'd put mines down in this area of sea in the Dardanelles. One of the Allied ships hit a mine and was destroyed almost immediately, and the rest of the fleet had to just wait it out and turn around and not pursue their original plan. Instead, it was decided that there was going to be a ground attack on the peninsula in two places. Some troops were going to land in the south on Cape Helles. This was going to be the main force, the main body of the force here. And then another group were to land further north in a place called Suvla Bay and another place now known as Anzac Cove. However, the problem here was that the navigators on the ships landed in the wrong place in the north, leaving the troops in a very disadvantaged position. Furthermore, the Turkish forces on the Gallipoli Peninsula were now well aware that this attack was going to take place, and their commander, a particularly young aspirational leader called Mustafa Kemal, who was later to become the president of Turkey, was there commanding his troops and making sure that the Turkish forces did not retreat. In fact, he gave them quite a brutal order. He said he ordered them not to fight, but to die, so that they could be replaced by more troops coming down from the nation's capital in Istanbul. So the Turks were on the side of the Germans during the First World War, and here's an example of a bit of German linkage going on here. This is a big German coastal gun, a Krupp coastal gun that was defending the coast of the Dardanelles at the time of the British attempted invasion. Once the Allied troops had landed on those beaches, they found it very difficult to push inland. They faced steep hillsides and heavy machine gun fire from the Turkish positions, set up by an army that was well aware that an attack was on its way. Once the Allies had dug in, things didn't get much easier. Another feature of this campaign was that there was an awful lot of digging, very much like the war that was on the Western Front. And here's an example of an Anzac communication tunnel. Now both sides were digging frantically to try and both undermine each other's trenches and to dig lines that would travel under the ground so that they weren't exposed to enemy fire on the very exposed surface. So lots of digging, lots of sweat, particularly in the summer, and again, not a very nice place to be. Another thing to bear in mind here is that you can see lots of trees, pine trees in the background, but of course during the First World War these trees were not here and they've had time to grow up since. So the land would have been very open, and any attack made over it would have been very, very obvious and very exposed. And that's one of the reasons that so many of the Australian and New Zealand troops came under such heavy fire, and the Turks did too from the other side when they of course did a counter-attack, and that of course resulted very quickly in a large amount of fatalities over a very short and intense period of time. You get a better idea here about the conditions of how the battlefield might have actually looked in 1915 itself, because it's very flat, very exposed. The Anzac trenches were just in front of me here, but then across the way you might be able to see the sign in the distance. They're not very far away at all are the Turkish trenches. So imagine having to get out of the trench, run across this short piece of land under machine gun fire, under the fire of rifles. You're getting shot at, and as well as having explosives thrown at you as well potentially, and you've got to make it to the other side. Now the Anzacs actually managed to win this battle and take this area of land. However, it was very brief, and then the Turks made a counter-attack and managed to regain it as well. In any case, you can imagine that the conditions were pretty horrific. Right, I'm a soldier now. I'm going to go across the front line. Here I am, going quickly. You can imagine bullets whizzing around me here. I'm making my way to the Turkish front line, only a few metres away. Some of the accounts from the battles say that they got so close that they were fighting with their fists, barehandedly, because obviously the enemy was in such close proximity. So here I am. I've just run from the Anzac trench to the Turkish front line. Didn't take me much time at all, but then I didn't have a whole Turkish army fighting against me. Ultimately, there was so much killing in the first month or two of the Gallipoli campaign that both sides organised a one-day truce to collect their dead and their wounded on the battlefield. During this period, there was a kind of Christmas-like exchange as there was on the Western Front. Some Turks and Allied troops met, exchanged greetings and gifts and letters, and at sunset they returned to their trenches, the next day resuming the killing. We're at Lone Pine Cemetery now, on top of one of the ridges, and an interesting thing just on one of the boards here is that when the British Commonwealth came back to collect their dead, which the terms of the treaty at the end of the war allowed them to do here, they were missing 13,000 people, so 13,000 men or soldiers that lost their lives couldn't be officially named or recognised because their bodies had been lost during the course of the conflict.
All right, men. We're going. I want you all to remember who you are. You're the 10th Light Horse. Men from Western Australia. Don't forget it. Good luck.
Neither side, though, could break the stalemate that ensued, and soon there was a new problem of disease and frostbite, the Turkish winter setting in amongst Allied troops who had not come prepared with winter equipment. By December, it was becoming clear to the Allied leadership that there was going to be no way in which the Allies could break through into the Ottoman Empire itself, and the attack was abandoned. Ships collected the surviving Allied soldiers, and the Gallipoli Peninsula was silent once more. This area here brings us to the last phase of the Gallipoli campaign at Chunuk Bair, where the Turks, led by a certain Mustafa Kemal Ataturk, a man who was to eventually lead Turkey after the First World War, was in command of a couple of divisions of men, and he wanted to get rid of the Anzac troops from this area. So he launched a bayonet charge across the no man's land over to the Australian and New Zealand lines and managed to push them out. And that then marked the end of the British occupation of this peninsula. In a bigger way though, in terms of bigger events as to why the British Empire decided to eventually pull out of Gallipoli, it was all to do actually with events that were going on in the east of Europe, with Bulgaria and Serbia going to war with each other and entering the First World War, meaning that the Eastern Front, the dynamics of the Eastern Front had changed. No matter though, there was still an incredible amount of bloodshed that went on here, and in this last attack, over 1,000 British Empire soldiers were killed in this Turkish bayonet charge, not to mention a huge number of the Turkish troops on the opposing side as well. And actually, one of my favourite things about this visit to Gallipoli was to see how the fallen on both sides are remembered there.
Between the Johnnies and the Mehmets, there is no difference to us where they lie side by side, here in this country of ours. You, the mothers, who sent their sons from faraway countries, wipe away your tears. Your sons are now lying in our bosom and are in peace. After having lost their lives on this land, they have become our sons as well.
So this is Ataturk in 1934.
Yeah. I think this is the most peaceful letter that I have ever seen, because
this is Anzac Cove and the memorial to the Australian and New Zealanders that fell here. Over 200,000 men lost their lives on the British Army side. That includes the Australian and the New Zealanders and fighting for the British Empire. And on the Turkish side, about 250,000 men as a result of all of the battles of the Gallipoli campaign ended up losing their lives. A huge number, despite the camaraderie that went on between them at some points during this conflict, and the conflict which of course was ultimately fruitless, arguably, and didn't really result in any kind of victory for the British at all in terms of achieving the aims that they'd set out to do. For the Ottomans, it was a short-lived victory because, as our guide has already said, the Ottoman Empire was known as the sick man of Europe among some circles at this time. It was in a state of decline, and in fact by the end of the First World War it had basically disintegrated, allowing Britain and France and the League of Nations, the newly created League of Nations, to take advantage of it. So here's Anzac Cove, and I'll leave you with some pictures of this beautiful and memorable place.